Evening, everyone. Welcome to the Money Pigs livecast. This is episode 55. I am Twerp78, one of your hosts. Along with me is the Blue Muzzy and Spinal Dash. MOBA champion John is taking a break tonight, but we have a more than adequate replacement. And
Illustrious guest.
Mr. WaystoneGasty has decided to grace us with his presence, and we thank you very much for joining us, Gasty.
Of
Welcome to
course.
the show, man.
I'm happy to be here. It's a good avenue for a more quick-paced discussion with the community than forums or
Absolutely.
otherwise. So
Very
Indeed.
cool. So we are super excited to have you on the show tonight. Do you just want to kind of give everyone your like full title for those of you who don't know who you are?
Because I was advertising
Sure.
you and I didn't know what to say.
So I am the lead systems designer on Dawngate at Waystone. So I am responsible for all of the non-content related design for the most part. So things like, how the item system works, how spirit wells work, how the
Beautiful.
wind conditions and everything other than just like raw shaper content basically falls into my domain. And although I help out there very rarely, I help out there. So I am a good question. I'm a good person to ask questions to regarding just general things about the game. Things I won't be able to be as specific on are things related to the content side of things, since that is not my domain. But otherwise, I should be able to do my best to shed some insights.
Well, either way, we are happy to have you here, and we're going to get into this stuff with you in just a little bit. But first, what's kind of become like our weekly thing here is we got to take a minute to talk about today's Chronicle.
Yeah.
So this is page 37.
Yep.
Quick overview. I mean, it was pretty much a short chapter this week. We just kind of saw like Michaela's walking through the palace. She hears a conversation happening behind a door where someone is talking to someone else. We don't really know who, and they're kind of explaining what's going on with the Dawn Gate and the spirits crossing over, and the Dawn Gate opens. And if you're not a shaper when the Dawn Gate's opening, it just kills you. And it says, only those bonded to a spirit can survive the event. And then Michaela knocks on the door, and we assume is going to go have a conversation with whoever is in this other room. I imagine it's at least two people, unless it's just one guy talking to himself in a mirror. That would be kind of weird. It could be King of Masks. He would be the one guy who would be talking to himself behind a door, but it didn't seem like the kind of verbiage that we've come to we've come to see with King of Masks. So,
True.
what do you guys think about today's Chronicles?
I mean, it was an important. People say it wasn't that eventful, but it's, for me at least, the newbie that I am. It shed light on like what the Dawn Gate is, why we're playing this game, like why are these shapers in here at this time, like what do they have to gain, why are they in there, and not other people. We see the reason why there's a video game to play, because only the shapers can be in there when the Dawn Gate opens. Clearly there's going to be something valuable to be gained for being there when it opens, and so we kind of have the reasoning for why we have a 5v5 game.
Yeah, I thought that was actually really cool too. I didn't realize that it was like constantly opening and closing. That was something
Right.
I wasn't really sure of. The other thing that I liked about it was that the fact that it opens on the intervals, and I want to know if Michaela is a shaper at this point in the story, or if she's gonna go try and become a shaper now with this knowledge, and maybe like hang out around the Dawn Gate and like try and like get.
Very
Well,
easy spirit.
that's dangerous though. If you hang out around the Dawn Gate and it opens and you're not already a shaper, you die. So,
Yeah, but like, okay, but is it like an
What
Ark
if-
of a Covenant, like Indiana Jones thing, where like if it's in your
Right.
room and you're looking at it, like can she like close her eyes and not have the poltergeist come and
Darius
steal
gonna
her soul?
Catch one for her. He's gonna
I
catch
think the
one
most
for her.
important thing about this entire comic is that everybody, is staring at her butt. I think that is clearly the most
Two
important thing.
panels of it. It's the most important part,
That
right?
Michaela butt dough. Oh come on, she's wearing like it's not even like a form-fitting dress. You don't even see anything.
Yeah. Well, she's supposed to be not the, what is she? She's not a princess. I mean, I guess she is, right?
She's
She's
basically
like,
merchant princess.
basically merchant
you know.
princess. Yeah. Yeah, so
She's a my
I'm
super
sure
sweet
she's
16 in Dawngate area. Like, she's a
yeah,
rich guy's daughter.
yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I was looking for cues in all the panels to see if anything was glowing, to kind of alert us to the fact that she was or wasn't a shaper, but nothing's letting slip that information right now.
No. How do you guys have you, Gassy? Just I don't know if you know this stuff, but like, how have you guys been? How do you guys feel like Chronicles has been received so far? Is it exceeding expectations, kind of meeting expectations? I know this really isn't your like deal, but just what's your guys' general thought process on how the Chronicles and the lore integration has been progressing to this point?
It's definitely been exceeding our expectations just in
Oh wow.
terms of raw metrics like number of users, reading it
I see.
actively, the amount of engagement it's driving with the game.
Hmm.
It is are actually very high, which nobody's really done anything like this before. So it was sort of an unknown. We sort of didn't really know what it would be going into it, but so far it's been received very, very well. So that gives us just increased, confidence and verification in the direction we're going with trying to integrate the lore with the game. So.
Is it possible now, like with the continued success of kind of the lore aspect of it, where you're really gonna let like Dandelion and those guys, like you're just gonna like kind of like take the cuffs off them and let them go like crazy with the lore stuff and really get like deep and really into it, or do you guys kind of still have like a through line of where you all want this to go, at least at the beginning, and then it kind of, well, when it gets to that point, we'll see what happens. But you still, I mean, we're still introducing characters and still, kind of meeting the shapers of the Dawngate. So, like, how much longer do you think you're going to stay into like this intro aspect of it, or do you have a time frame for that?
So I can't talk too much about the time frame.
Okay.
But there is definitely going to be a transition when we move from less of a introductory kind of, okay, what are these kind of shapers backstories? When did they become shapers? That's kind of been the theme. There's definitely going to be a transition from that to a much more, the next stage, right? Less individual character backstory and more of okay, these characters introduced, now they're actually telling a story throughout the world and how that impacts the Dawngate itself and the game. So there will be a transition. I can't say when that will be, however.
Cool. Wow, that's very cool stuff. I mean, I know
Yeah.
me, I really never had high expectations for lore. I've never really cared about it when it came to MOBAs, even though I am a big storyline guy in general.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, my
your
favorite
RPGs.
Yeah, like I am all about the JRPG. I want to hear the epic quest of the hero wanting to save the world. So, to have it in a MOBA and for me to actually be caring about it and like following it, I follow the Chronicles like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It's the first thing I look at. So,
Amen.
I think you guys are doing a really great job with that, and I really can't wait to see, where it's going to go from here. I'm sure Buzzy and Spinal can agree with that.
Oh yeah.
Amen.
I wake up every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'm like, it's only about a 5-minute drive to work. I can wait. But that's about as much as I want to wait in the morning. So.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, that was just our little bit of a lore discussion. So
Certainly.
now that we have Gasty here and he is amongst us, we have like the subreddit. If you guys do not subscribe to the subreddit, you really should, because one post in particular sparked a ton of debate today, and that was kind of a something that's kind of your wheelhouse, Gasty. It was a balance. Muzzy is going to gracefully link it for us right now. This was made by Mars Catarix, who is one of the on Team FDAT. He's one of the higher level players. Big leaderboard nerd. He's been around in Dawngate since the beginning. So it's really coming from a knowledgeable source. And just kind of going through that, Gasty, what do you guys, just your initial like impressions when you see these big long Bibles that people post on the subreddit? Are you guys like, oh no, or like oh no, they're mad, or like, oh, I want to see what they think as opposed to what I think? Like where do you guys what do you guys do when it comes to feedback like that? What's your initial like impression of that?
It's extremely valuable, first of all. So we're certainly always happy when we're happy and sad, right? Where there's always there's a happiness because it's like, well, this is really good feedback and it's gonna make the game better. And then there's always a little bit of sadness where it's like, okay, we've hit the mark, we've missed the mark somewhere, right? There is enough of a problem either perception or in raw balance where it's creating a negative experience for our player base, and that is never good, right? And that's but we need to take steps to solve those issues, and community feedback and interactions with the community is a critical tool we use towards doing that. So threads like this that spark really great discussion are very, very valuable for us. Which is why I am here tonight in order to, I was initially going to write up a huge reply and a giant thread in that post, but I realized that I found myself writing up things that would be better to have in a discussion forum where we could go back and forth. So I sort of held off, but yeah, when we see these, it's always good.
Cool.
Does this generally make its rounds around the office, and then you guys have discussions about it like during, like right around the initial post, or do you guys kind of put it off because you guys have work to do and stuff?
It depends. I mean, certainly on like the live balance team, for example, we discuss it and talk about it immediately. It probably has less of an immediate impact on like the engineering team or art team, but it is certainly immediately talked about and circulated throughout the team.
Cool. That's great. So do we want to jump in and I mean, Gasty, would you like? I mean, you have it. I'm assuming you have the link open.
You have
If
like
not,
a response?
I accidentally just closed it, but 1 second.
I just clicked it. I just linked it in the Skype.
All right, I got
Well,
it.
I mean, we can just start out pretty general. Now,
Yeah.
there's this debate out there. Do you balance the game with competitive in mind, or do you or where is the
That's a great
focus where
question.
balance is concerned? Because just so we can kind of clear the air, because there's people out there who are like, well, they're trying to balance for the highest level MMR, the competitive aspect of the game, because that's going to make the most money. And then you have the people in the camp of, well, no, they need to balance the game for new players. This way they can keep all these new players that are coming into the game. Where is the focus as far as balance is concerned? Obviously, in a perfect world, you want to keep everything balanced across all MMRs, but we live in the real world, and that's not always possible. So where does the focus lie when it comes to balance philosophy?
So that has a very long answer.
Yeah, I
which
understand.
which
It
we'll
was
get
a long
into
question.
later in the show.
Okay.
Okay.
The short answer is, like was mentioned in that post, we balance towards a very high skill level competitive environment. That is our goal, right? If we are falling short of that in some ways, discussions like this will help us to reach that goal, right? But our goal is to balance around a very, very high skill level and a competitive tournament environment. And our reasoning behind that is because it's basically been proven, I would say, right, through data I have access to from Riot, as well as from public information that's been displayed through Steam around the statistics regarding Dota 2, along with games like StarCraft, or even games like Hearthstone, which is starting to get into the esports kind of scene. We see a very, very common trend between all of these games, which is strategies that are commonplace at a very, very high skill level eventually reach lower skill levels.
trickle-down
Trickle-down effect. Exactly.
There you go.
That is almost universally true, and it takes a while. The further away you are from that high skill level, the longer it takes for that to reach you, but eventually those strategies will hit you. So things that
Right.
are a problem or need, basically, that it's not really a distinction between high skill and low skill as much. It's much more of a time frame. Everything that occurs at high skill, or at least the vast majority of it, will be the same at low elo eventually. It just takes longer to get there.
See,
it's a way to think about
that
it.
is a great answer, and I think that's an aspect I don't think people have ever looked at before, just like from a general populace concern, because it's either I'm low MMR, they're not balancing the game for me, or it's I'm high MMR and they're not balancing the game for me. When you realize, no, it is actually going to be for everyone, and it's like you said, that trickle-down effect does happen. So that's...
I mean, that shows itself easily with flavor of the month. I mean, that's kind of what it does. The pros do it in league, and then all of a sudden everybody's doing it. But because it's broadcast everywhere, and they have such a large access to their community, especially the high elo players, that trickles down much faster. Whereas in Dawn Gate we have a smaller community, and I think that it trickles down a bit slower here.
Yep. I mean, there always are a couple outliers. There are some shapers which just have higher mechanical skill requirements, for example, which will always excel a little bit between skill levels, right? But they're actually relatively far and few between. Some of them you guys are aware of here.
I bet I could guess
I'm
them.
pulling up the raw data so I can make sure I'm getting it all
I
correct.
bet Asherbell's the worst one.
Ashabel actually is one of the least of offenders. Funnily enough, she
Wow.
has
Really?
a She has an absolutely minuscule difference between skill levels, which is
Okay,
unexpected.
Wow.
Certainly, you
That
would expect
is
her.
shocking. I
that
would not
shocks
have
me.
called that.
Really?
I would not have expected
Yeah.
it either. I would have expected her being one of the largest outliers.
Yeah.
That
That's
could
so
just be that
interesting.
nobody at a really high skill level is really
Really?
trying to excel with her. It's hard to say what
Yeah.
that means.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's true.
the greatest outliers by far are
Bollock.
Volek is the number one, as you would expect.
Yes.
Zalgus,
We
Viana, and
you.
Viridian are relatively close to him, however.
And Viridian has probably a
Okay.
lot less data than the rest of them, so
He does. That's just
I say this every time a new shaper comes out, and you get these cries of OP, UP, underpowered, etc. And I'm like, guys, we haven't figured out how to use them yet. We haven't figured out how to build them properly yet. And even though there are a lot of good players out there who claim to do that, I think it takes time before shapers really come into their own.
Yeah. In fact, there's really only one significant outlier in terms of a character which is much stronger at a high skill level than at a low skill level, which is Moya. Interestingly enough.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
Moya's real.
She incites terror in the hearts of men everywhere.
Yep.
She's quite a
She has never been
terror.
an easy one to pin down for that kind of a thing. Like
Quite
whether
literally.
or not she's balanced.
Interestingly, back to the Astraville, the data on her is very interesting, actually. There's only one shaper who is closer. She is the second in the game for the lowest differential between high and low, with only Vex being more similar between
Vex?
high and low.
Oh.
Yeah, because Vex at low MMR probably can't get his build off and become.
No, he just deletes everyone.
Yeah, which one is it?
I don't know. I'm assuming at low MMR Vex has a lower win rate.
Really? I would say
Both-
that
They're both very similar is what he's saying. So
yeah, so it's either at low and high he's bad or low and high he's good. That's what you're saying, right, Gasty?
Right. Well, he's basically fine in both. There's only a 0.07% discrepancy between high and low skill between him.
Jeez. Wow.
do you
That's
ever worry,
impressive.
Gasty? Do you ever worry, Gasty, that there's too small of a sample size for you to have like accurate metrics?
So we basically wait until this is why our balancing can often seem to be delayed, right?
Yeah.
The community will raise problems or raise, have trends that get established, and it often seems like we react almost one patch behind, right? It's like people are like, this is a problem, and then it goes unchanged, and then people are like, it's a big problem, and it gets a lot more traction, and then it gets changed. The reason behind that is not because we're not paying attention, but it's because we're waiting until we have sufficient sample sizes to really identify where the very specific problem is.
So
Understanding.
you guys function off of information only,
Metrics.
like not just hearsay, but always just the information.
Yes, we go off of exclusively hard raw data, and I'll go into this a little bit further
Okay.
in a little bit. But it is extremely filtered data to try to hit our goal of balancing around a competitive level. But we have to wait until we get a very, very large statistically relevant sample size in order to
Right.
have reliable data. So.
Guys, just quick for chat, we're gonna do Q&A with viewers with Gasty a little bit later, but for right now, we're asking our own questions. So it's our time now. Your time comes later. So yeah, just hold your questions till the end, guys, and we'll try and get as many in as we can. So the other kind of general just balancing question I had, or not just me, but that I've seen, it's kind of that argument today that was kind of brought up, like so in Dota 2 they balance so everything is super super strong and everything's broken, and in League they balance where everything gets nerfed and you're fighting with like little toy knives. What's the overall kind of thought process behind Dawngate?
So it is somewhere in between the two. It hasn't been locked down yet. Basically, I was thinking about, like, I knew this answer would come up, or this question would come up. So I was thinking about exactly how I wanted to articulate the answer before the show, and I think that the best way to describe it is we are still finding what Dawngate's balance philosophy is. Right? We're still in early beta. We're not feature complete, right? We're still growing our population significantly. We're not at that critical mass yet. We're trending towards it, but we're not there yet. It's still very early. So by having conversations like this, by having open forms of discussion around our balanced philosophies, I'm hoping that we can evolve it to a place where the community is the most happy with it. And I think it'll net out somewhere in between the wrapped in hyperbole styles people describe League of Legends and Dota.
Yes.
So now Dota doesn't have items that actually affect like or abilities that have power ratios and stuff like that, and their abilities don't scale off of their items. So in Dawngate and League of Legends case, I think it may even be more difficult to balance because you have to balance a character and then an item, but that item affects all characters potentially. So then you're kind of like fighting yourself with that one.
Especially in this game where power is a shared stat.
It is, yeah.
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, there are the more axes of elements there are that can change the impact of an ability or a shaper's performance, the harder it is to balance, right? The more moving parts, the more difficult it is. One of the elegant components of Dota's design is that they have less moving parts in the sense where they don't have the individual characters, for the most part, other than agility carries, right? And some other exceptions, can't reach the hyper carry status purely off itemization, right? You're never going to see a support character murder all 5 enemies in 1 second. It's going to be rare. That allows them the freedom to do some things that help their balance process. It allows them to basically put all of the balancing, or the great majority of it, into the base tuning of a single ability, right? If that character is too strong, and they're too strong because their QWER burst is too high on a character like Queen of Pain or something, they can just lower the base damage on those abilities. And that hits the problem relatively safely. Likewise, if they want to make a character stronger, this allows them to do some interesting things in ability design, right? It allows them to do things like Spirit Breaker's Q, which is like a global charge.
Oh, I love that guy.
Stun.
Yeah, that guy's really cool. I like that. I've in like the 30 times I've played Dota 2, I think like 10 of them were with that dude, so I know what you're talking about.
Right, so that would be an ultimate in a game that has ability scaling, because ability scaling inherently kind of is a multiplier on everybody's damage, and abilities that give you hard CC or those types of metrics just become increasingly more powerful. So I think that we're going to be somewhere in between, because we have ability scaling, because we think it's really fun for everybody to have the chance to be that guy, to snowball out of control and really make a significant impact on the game via murdering dudes. But we're also wanting to be very flexible in our shaper design. It's a goal that I know Dibs has, to create really interesting, unique abilities which probably, at least in the past, right? Who knows where they'll go in the future, but abilities that you probably would be considered not safe enough in a League of Legends environment to try to introduce. Something like Moya's ultimate, something like Kensu's ultimate, are things like Mina's W, right? Those are abilities which are a little crazier. And we want to embrace the crazy, right? We want to try to make those types of abilities work. So I think we're probably going to end up somewhere in between.
Cool.
Interesting. So do we want to go into any of these things, or are we still keeping it pretty generalized here?
I mean, unless you guys just had any other general kind of just like opening questions, and we can get into this. We can get into specific shapers now. Yeah.
Actually, what's your favorite shaper to play, Gasty?
My favorite shaper to play right now is Kensu.
Kensu, yeah.
I made him to be a delight for myself. So
Kenzu's my favorite range DD. So I mean, you got me there. I don't like range JD, but if I play range, Kenzu's the only one I own. So
I think if you were trying to make a range carry that was different from like the basic range carry, which I think the first 4 range carries are good at that, I think Kensu fulfilled the goal of making somebody that does the same purpose, but does it a little bit differently, significantly differently.
Brings a lot of utility, yeah.
And just his auto attack stuff, like that's just so cool to see you guys, like something that is so like cookie cutter as AD. You know, you guys like are looking for a way. How do we change what everyone knows about ranged AD? Oh well, like the auto attack cadence and like the whole knocking of arrows thing. It's so simple, but I think it's so cool that.
Even better than that, I have been a staunch hater of bow shapers, and I can honestly say that Waystone did a great job of making a bow shaper that was interesting, not just. I mean, he
That is
does have a
true. I forgot
slow,
about
which
that, Muzzy.
he has a slow, which really bugs me because all bow shapers seem to have a slow, cripple or ice. But I think it does it in a very interesting way. It's very cool. So that's
Yeah, I mean
good too.
that's an example of kind of our shaper. Dibs could speak on this more, but I know that Dibs and the shaper content team is really trying to hit some of the more kind of unique concepts, right? Do some stuff. We don't want 12 different flavors of the same thing. We want to
Right.
really try to create some more interesting mechanics and unique playstyles per archetype going forward.
Well, okay. So with which shapers do you find the most difficult to balance? Like which type archetype?
So by far the most difficult shapers to balance. So I guess to answer this question first, I'm going to provide a little bit of context around the word balance and what it means to us, because there are
Ooh.
I
That's
like
good.
this. I like this.
I
Yes.
like it.
Spinal. I'm doing the same thing with my hands.
there are
Nomenclature.
there are two avenues in which we approach balance. The the goal of a balanced game and a balanced shaper is that it provides the most fun to everybody in the game. Right? It's all about the amount of fun it provides.
Ah.
Things can impact the fun negatively in a variety of different ways, right? If a character is just tuned to be way too good, that is not fun for the majority of players in that game, right? If a shaper is tuned to be quote unquote balanced statistically, according to their data, um, they can still contribute, you know, anti-fun, so to speak, in other ways, by being frustrating to play against or having particular abilities which are too strong, even though if their kit as a whole is balanced. The characters which are balanced are perfectly balanced, so to speak, statistically, right? After all of our filtering, after all of our analysis, they're within, you know, less than 0.5% of where we want them to be, but are perceived to be extremely strong or extremely weak because of a frustrating component of their kit. Those characters are the most difficult to balance. I think really good examples of this are Ashabel and Ferris recently. Ashabel and Ferris both, well, slightly different. Ashabel is extremely weak statistically. She is currently the second lowest performing shaper in the game.
Don't you dare
When
buff
she
her.
launched, she was the lowest performing shaper in the game.
She's very difficult.
But people were screaming that she was overpowered because there was getting hit by her Q every 3 seconds in lane felt extremely frustrating. It created this feeling of you're under constant bombardment. It felt like it was too much reward for the amount of risk. And in a vacuum, that was true. If you took her Q ability, if Shapers had a single ability, right, and that was it, I'm sure she would be extremely overpowered, right? But across her whole kit, she wasn't. Her E was hard to use. Her ultimate has a very long time to hit, very hard to land optimally. You see a lot of whiffed Ashabel ultimates, right? But she was hard because we couldn't buff her, right? Because the community would lose their minds if we buffed her at that stage. So those type of characters we have to do a very, very careful give and take where we remove power from the abilities which are frustrating and creating a perception of either overpoweredness or just creating an unfun environment. And we give power to the parts of the kit which are weaker or more invisible in order to reach the actual balance state we want. Ferris is a more difficult challenge because he was actually right around where he should be. He was within that 1% benchmark of where we wanted him to be. But both Ferris and Ashabel were experiments where both of them had relatively weak ultimates. If you consider an ultimate like Nisa's, probably has one of the strongest ultimates in the game. She can instantaneously deliver thousands and thousands of damage to the team. Ashabel and Ferris's ultimate in comparison are far weaker. They're delayed. They have a variety of counterplay, right? Sometimes they do very little damage. This allows their Q abilities, respectively, to be much stronger. That was sort of an experiment on shaper design. It was like, what is the reception to a character which has strong regular abilities but weaker ultimates as a result? And the result is people have this perception of the character being extremely strong because you interact with the Q abilities far more often than you interact with the ultimate abilities just by nature of their cooldowns. So those two characters are very tricky, and it's why you saw in both cases of our tuning, you saw us reduce elements that were frustrating, the Q damage on Ferris, the Q damage on Ashabel, while buffing other parts of their kit, such as the ultimate on Ferris, such as the E on Ashabel, to try to keep them statistically where we want them to be, but address the anti-fun of those characters.
I feel like Zeri and Dibs kind of fall under the same. I feel like Zeri and Dibs fall under the same thing because Zeri and Dibs ults, you can't really tell how effective it is unless you're actually being dealt damage or doing damage, and even then you don't have enough time to be able to tell that. But then their QWE are fairly effective and you deal with them a lot, so they have to fall under the same kind of scope there.
They absolutely do. In fact, you really hit the nail on the head with Zeri. I think Zeri is a great example of this in the opposite direction. I'm going to use this word a lot tonight, which is visceral. It's a word that us game design nerds like to use, and it means can you feel it or not, right?
That's a good word. No, I like it. That's quality choice.
Yeah. So there are some things in games which are visceral, like hard CC, slows,
Cerulean Dunk,
right?
Crits.
Shields, heals, right? Things that you notice immediately. Then there are things which are not visceral. They're basically completely invisible. Things like percentage damage reduction or percentage power increase or power as a stat in general, right? Haste and attack speed, very visceral. Power and defense penetration, completely invisible. Characters like Zeri, we can tune to be extremely strong. Nobody would know. It would be a secret until like a month.
Right.
Yeah. Like, in fact, Zeri has always been very strong, and she continues to be very strong because her W gives people an astronomically large amount of stats. It gives them like a free legendary item. That's like 3,000 Vim worth of stats, right?
And people want her W changed.
Right.
No.
But they're like, that ability's so weak.
It feels like nothing.
Right?
Negative amounts of viscerality. Right. You're just like, and the worst part is when your own power goes down. You're like, oh, my power went down by 30 and I gave you 15.
Right. Yeah. It's not a satisfying ability to use, but it's extremely powerful from a gameplay perspective, which is this is something which is an interesting design space, right? You have, generally speaking, it is bad to have what I consider power without gameplay, just raw effectiveness that doesn't create anything. I used to consider aura items under this category. Aura items are extremely effective, but you don't really notice them because their effect is amortized across so many different sources and in a small chunk. Like Devotion, the heal is visceral. You can see it happen, it's an immediate effect, know it. The stat gain from Devotion, completely invisible, but actually much more effective than the heal in terms of turning it out an outcome of a fight. I used to not want any of those items in the game. Dibs convinced me, being a big support advocate, that there is a kind of cognitive viscerality to those abilities, right? Where it's like you
because you feel like you're helping your team. You're like, I'm a team member.
Yes, no, I mean, it feels good when you get a Pestilence or you get a Devotion on a support shaper that, you're like, all right, I got my item. Like, I am now contributing to my team. No, I agree with that philosophy.
Yep. So there's this intellectual kind of enjoyment from knowing, even if you can't feel it, you were effective. You buy a Devotion and you're like, yes, I know it's being effective, even though I can't immediately feel it, and I derive enjoyment from that as opposed to the
But then you have like passives like Aura Strike, which are incredibly visceral. Wind Strike Aura. Sorry, there we go. That's
okay.
Yeah, the double attacks. That's incredibly visceral.
Yeah, and we try to design a lot of the item content to be visceral in that way, because if you are choosing between the two, the visceral one is just always better, generally speaking, right? If all things are considered equal and you have the ability to make one more noticeable, you should go with that direction. But for characters which are, in order to provide flavor in different varieties, right? Some characters are just inherently more invisible in the power they give. And I think that Zeri is an example of that, where almost all of her effectiveness is very invisible. I think Mina is another example of this.
That's what I was going to say.
Percentage damage reduction on her E, percentage damage increase on her R, both
Nobody
very
sees
effective,
it.
both very invisible.
No, they just see the laser of death.
You just see death.
Yeah.
It's also why things with like Ferris, right? When we were making adjustments to Ferris, the probably most common community suggestion was, we'll make his E have a reactivation delay, because the E is the most visceral thing when fighting him, right? He appears and then
Right.
disappears immediately. When actually we have him now at a, I think that he'll probably still need some tweaks, but he's certainly in a better place now than he was
I
before.
think
Yeah, I
so.
was gonna say what you guys were thoughts on Faris, because he was one of those like problem shapers that people, he was getting a lot of buzz about his power level or perceived power level. I didn't really think he was that big of a deal on his own. I think it was Faris in combination with other shapers, but I mean, just based off the and you didn't directly just like, hi, we're nerfing Faris and just making him weaker. You
Right.
changed things about him. You
Switched his
changed the
power
way
around.
his ult works. Yeah, you moved some of the powers
Because
around,
he
and
was
you guys
actually in
talked
a
about
good
that.
place. He was actually in a good place, which is what Gasty was explaining earlier.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and but I mean, so you guys kind of happy with the feedback you've seen since the Faris changes? Do you feel he's less of a problem shaper now?
We feel he's less of a problem. I think that we sort of traded problems. Before he was statistically balanced in terms of his performance output, but was not balanced from a fun level, right? He was creating much more anti-fun, and the components of him that were really strong were very invisible, which was leading people to latch that performance onto his more visceral components of his kit, like his E, incorrectly. And so we were able to, I think, solve the perception issue, or at least heavily mitigate the perception issue with our change. People are not as he is not as much of a hot topic these days in the community, and he's less frustrating to play against, which I think is good. But we've also made him a little bit weaker than we intended him to be. He's below our threshold of
Wow.
performance by not a lot, by a very small margin. He probably needs minor performance increases, but we need to be very careful to do it in a way that does not bring back the previous problems around the frustration he was creating.
Interesting. No, that's good feedback to hear. But I mean, so now I'd like to kind of move on to a shaper that's always. Or do you have something, Spinal, before?
I was just gonna say, I mean, I think metrics is a wonderful way to balance. I worry, like, I feel like as a player on the leaderboards, I don't know, as a player in the higher echelons of play, I worry sometimes because I feel like the solo queue experience, or the average experience that the majority of Dawn Gate plays on right now, because the competitive scene is relatively small. I worry that the metrics you're getting, like, I very rarely feel, and I think other players might echo this sentiment that the top level of play is even being experienced anywhere in the solo queue ladder right now. And because of that, you're not going to see it in the competitive scene. You're getting glimpses of it, but you're not getting there yet because there's just not enough. It hasn't been established long enough. There hasn't been enough tournaments. There hasn't been enough people scrimming. There hasn't been enough high level play in the solo queue experience. Does that ever concern you, or do you just think that's an issue that you're not going to be able to deal with until you get a higher player base?
So it's a good question, and it kind of goes into the Reddit post that Mars posted, right, around balance around, and a lot of people have the same reaction that you just did, where you're like, well, balancing around win rates, that seems flawed, right? There are inherent problems with win rates.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk real quick about what I mean when I say we balance around data, because we don't
Okay.
just take the win rates of the shape. That
Of course not.
There's
Of course not.
lots of reasons why that can be incorrect. So let me start by asking you a question, which
All right.
is, what components around win rates do you feel would lead to inaccurate data?
Can you rephrase the question? What components around win rates lead to inaccurate data? I just worry, like my example would be, like, I imagine Mina, she probably has a little over high win rate. But like I said, like, I feel like a lot of her power is invisible, or is not accessed by the majority of the people that play her. I mean, there's very few players that are going to be able to abuse the fact that she basically blitzes while she's traveling with her W, which enters
It's
somebody.
like a blitz blink, yeah.
Right, like, there's very few people that are going to be able to access that power, but the fact that she has it, it's unexploited power. I feel like she has a lot of unexploited power still, that I feel like the metrics aren't going to show that, right? They're not going to show that, but
So
it's there.
basically, to
I
answer
know it's
Gassie's question,
there.
then it's skill. Then it's skill and time. No, I mean it would be like
guess.
skill,
I mean,
like MMR essentially.
Right. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? But what you're articulating is that there are elements of kits, such as the CC immunity for a short duration with Mina, which are very effective when players take advantage of them, but the percentage of the
Right.
population that can accurately take advantage of
Can
them
and
is small.
will. Yes.
Right. So that's a great example, right? To throw some other examples in there of things that I consider that can influence win rate data are things like the dual queue disparity. If you have somebody
Right.
who is 1,000 elo above their dual queue partner and they queue into a game, right? That game may result in a 50% win rate because their dual queue partner is 500 elo below their opponents, and the other one is at 500 elo above, and one guy goes 20 and 0, and the other one goes 0 and 20. That game and games like that over time may result in 50%. However, games like that can influence win rate data in a strange way, or just raw shaper stats in a weird way, right? They can inflate KDA positively or negatively. They can inflate CS metrics per time. They can inflate raw win rate. So those are all examples that, the example you brought up, the example I just brought up are two of several of things that can result in win rates being insufficient balancing data. And I can completely understand why people would be displeased that we tune around that data. And the answer is we don't tune around that data. What we tune around is we tune around a heavily modified and filtered win rate criteria, where we believe we have filtered out the vast majority of elements that could result in it being not indicative of the true experience. So from the skill perspective, we only look at win rate data with the top 3% of our population, for example.
Okay.
It's a very, very high level of population. We only look at win rates where the average VIM differential between the winning and losing team is within 20%. We throw out games that are super
Okay.
stomps one way or another. We
Got it.
only look at,
Economy
we obviously throw
difference,
away
right?
all mirror matches. We throw away anything that has a elo differential between the highest and low member of a single team greater than 100.
That's interesting.
Right.
That
We
is
filter
I was just
interesting.
these
gonna ask about
things.
that. That's great.
We filter these down to an extremely detailed level, and we
Uh-huh.
try to throw away anything that could result in influencing the data, right? And what we're left with is something that we consider to be relatively indicative of high-level
Okay.
play, and it matches, generally speaking, what we anecdotally are experiencing as well, and what we're hearing from the community.
Huh.
That's very
That's pretty
interesting.
great.
That's really
that-
like good insight as as the process works, because yeah, so that's
I hope that gives people more faith
Yeah.
on your balancing methods then, because I'm certainly sold by that. That makes a lot of sense.
And we'll continue to add additional filters and layers to that as possible. And I mean, and it kind of goes to Spinal's initial point of the tournament scene and the competitive scene in Donge is still very early. It's still growing, right?
It's a baby.
We don't have the raw sample sizes from just tournament data to form
no.
accurate balance metrics, right? It is
No, no,
extremely
no.
useful in identifying trends and identifying and throwing up red flags around shapers that we should identify in more detail.
Certainly.
But it's not enough. It's just not enough raw quantity of it yet to get a sufficient sample sizes. Whereas with our previous heavily filtered data, like I just described, right? Even with all those filters, we can get 50,000 sample sizes per shaper and have a statistically relevant amount of information to go off of.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very neat.
So
All right.
so with just real quick, with all of the times that you've had to nerf and buff things, have you guys found that there's a I mean, I know you said you're still trying to Dawngate's still trying to come into its own as far as balance procedures and whatnot, but have you found that several times that your either initial release has been incredibly balanced, oddly enough, or that it's required a lot of play from a larger population in order to get to that balanced area? And would you say that the first buff or nerf of a shaper has more often than not resulted in a favorable balance?
It's interesting. There are many different ways that can play out, I guess is the best way to say it. We intentionally will launch shapers in different states of balance based on what type of shaper it is in order to try to create the most beneficial game state possible. To answer the first question, the shaper which has come out the most balanced is Kensu. He released at about a 50.4% after all of our filtering. and I believe he has since then settled to 50.01. So very, very balanced.
Wow.
Interesting,
With
because he actually got
minimal
buffed since
changes other than
release.
bug fixes.
Right. Those are pretty big events.
Shapers which have released the most egregious are the ones that I would say probably have higher mechanical skill caps. We had,
Ash.
like I said, large variations with Ashabel on her launch. We had large variations with Vex on his launch. We're seeing large variations with Viridian on his launch.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you guys just real quick? Do you mind talking a little bit about Viridian and
Sure.
what you from Waystone's perspective is Viridian? Do you feel good about his balance? Do you feel like he's kind of is he being played the way you expected? I mean, I've seen more and I've had more success building Viridian tankier than building him as kind of like a burst assassin, and I know I've seen more of that around, and we've talked about this the past couple weeks just in talking about Viridian. So what are your guys' thoughts on Viridian, or where do you think he stands?
So Viridian is interesting. He is probably, in my personal opinion, I think he is probably one of the most mechanically complex shapers we have released in terms of needing to do well with. His mechanical skill is very, very high. So he is seeing a relatively large amount of movement every week to week as people get more familiar with him. He's also played across all of the roles. Relatively, his distribution across all 4 roles is more evenly spread apart than a lot of our other characters. So that implies people haven't really found which role they prefer him in yet. They're still experimenting. He's still in that experimental phase.
Or maybe he's just good at all of them.
Or he could be good at all
I
of
think
them, right?
it's a Shorewind thing where the Shorewind people are good at like all the roles.
Yeah, I mean, like
Yeah, like
Cerulean, for
Emma
example,
Jungle.
is played across all 4 relatively regularly. Cerulean, of all of our characters, probably has the most, given that he's has been out for a long time, we have really confident data on him. He is played across all 4 roles really significantly. He's probably the most diverse in terms of role diversity. So those Shorewind guys.
That's why he's the best.
But that being said, with somebody like Viridian, we generally, right now he's trending on the weaker side, but he is moving up as people get more familiar with him. It's basically what I'd expect. We launch a mechanically complex shaper. He's hard to play. People don't know how to play him optimally, but they get better over time.
Yep.
What you'll probably see with him as a result is incremental small balance changes. Because he's still in a relatively volatile state, we will make small changes designed to start moving him in a trending direction, either up or down, but we don't want to do anything really big because he could move up and down by decent amounts just purely based off players becoming more familiar with him.
Mm-hmm. I mean, also you have items. I mean, like I was saying earlier, item changes. For example, changing items or even passives on items like Mortal Strike, stuff like that, or maybe the change. Well, what was the last one? Empathy. Like that change all of a sudden has made Uber tanks from super tanks to Uber tanks. Like I've even seen it on some carries, and then they just never die. When you have a tank carry, you're never gonna die, especially if you throw in some life drain or something like that. With the amount of damage that they output, giving up that 1 slot for survivability, because now you only need 1 slot for survivability at all. Really, I mean, how do you handle stuff like that when you have items that you want to change because you're seeing an item underperform? I'm sure you guys have telemetry data on items as well, but how do you make sure that it's not a shaper or not an item that's causing something to happen? For example, if Fenmore all of a sudden starts losing dramatically, or Viana, or any of the life or shield-oriented shapers, do you then determine that Mortal Strike is OP and that all those items have to be nerfed, or maybe it's just the passive, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, basically we just apply an additional layer of filters. In addition to every filter I mentioned before, that's basically what we use as our baseline. We will then filter that down even more to get specific item data. So for example, we'll look at the win rate of every shaper who uses that item versus the win rate of every shaper who does not use that item, right? So we can see, okay, Reyna buys an empathy. And then we look at, 10,000 games of random bias empathy within that filtered sample size that we're confident in. Then we look at another 10,000 random games where she didn't buy empathy, and we see if there's any significant outliers between those. If there are, we go deeper. We look at, is it, where in the game did she buy it? What purchase order did she buy it in? Is it causing a snowball factor, or is she buying it simply because she's ahead and what the hell, might as well throw money on something? We use a lot of kind of comparison data like that in order to try to throw out what is just people buying it because, or what is data that's actually creating a correlation with win rate.
So do you guys have a team of like 70,000 people looking at this data, or do you just have an AI that does this?
It's just Gasty standing over someone going, enhance,
He just
enhance.
That cord coming out of his ear is actually going right into the telemetry data. Right?
Gastytron. Gastytron 9000.
Holy shit, this sounds like a lot of things.
It is. I mean,
fun,
it is.
right?
It is a lot of data, and it is a lot of very, very careful analysis that goes into this data. It is. We're certainly not doing anything based on a whim or based off of a single metric, right? Like the balance of a competitive game like this is extremely important, right? Especially if we want to develop Dawngate into a experience that people can play for a living, right? The balanced state is extremely important. We have. Just regarding telemetry data, we have probably 4 full-time people who are responsible for just providing telemetry data and analyzing it and providing these breakdowns, right? Like,
Wow.
it's something we take extremely seriously.
Are they all the one from the Matrix?
That's right. They're all just plugged in. The really old game Homeworld, where they have the computer girl who's just like plugged in to everything, right?
That's
It's like that.
I just want to point out to everybody how absolutely astronomical this data has to be or is, and the fact that they have 4 people going through it, and all of the balances off that, and everyone says like, oh, they over nerfed, they under nerfed, and it's all really just the feeling. It's like they don't really know. So I just feel like people just cannot judge game companies for nerfing or buffing too much.
People never give, like, general populace never give anybody any credit. Like, and I mean, and I understand this because I've been on both sides of it, and it's like, when you feel like it when you're in the community, when the developers do something you don't like, you feel like they're sitting like in an office, like drinking cognac in pinstripe suits, smoking cigars, like throwing darts at a dartboard, like, oh, this week we're nerfing Ferris, ha, suck on that community, like they're all just sitting there clinking their glasses, like, yeah, this is the high life.
No, I mean, but that being said, right? Like I said, to bring it full circle, to go back to what I said earlier in the show, we consider balance between 2 equally important components, right? And all of our telemetry data is designed for only one of those components, which is at a subset of parameters that we consider to have removed all of the poor data, right? Our telemetry data is focused around the competitive win rate, is how I would phrase it. But an equally important side of the balance argument is the frustration level, or the competitive level, or the anti-fun level, or whatever you want to call it, right? And those are where we often sometimes miss it, right? Because we may get a character like Ashbel or Ferris to be quote-unquote balanced, but those characters could still be a balance problem if people perceive them to be strong or weak because they're having a bad time playing against them for whatever reason. And that's where the community's involvement is critical, right? To answer your very first question of, are we happy or sad to see posts like the Reddit post around competitive balance, we're very happy, because that is our telemetry data for the other half of the puzzle, right? Mm-hmm. Is the community overwhelmingly having a sad time playing against or as a particular shaper? Because that's a critical balance problem. It may not impact the telemetry data, right? And we should use the telemetry data to make sure that regardless of whatever suite of changes we make to a shaper, it keeps it at a viable competitive level. But we also need to make these changes in mind to keep them at a fun level as well.
So then I'm sure you guys have dealt with the whole Volek craze that at lower elos at least, which is, I would say, the majority of the people who play the game, even though you only take from the top 3%, when everybody else is saying Volek is, bad or good or whatever. Like, how do you deal with that when it's not the upper 3% because he's not an issue there? Like, what do you do then?
In that scenario, we basically just wait for it to trickle down. Like, those characters, like Volek, for example, is very, very strong at
I
an
just
app.
started playing Dawn Guard.
He
My
is,
favorite sharper is
he's-
Vula.
If we were bouncing around that spectrum, he would be getting changes immediately.
Right.
But right now, unless it gets really, really egregious, I guess basically our thresholds for what we consider acceptable become more lenient as we go further down that skill tree. We balance around a very, very tight spectrum for our high-level competitive target. But for things that kind of fall outside of that spectrum at a lower level, we sort of just wait to see if the elements that make them okay at high level will just trickle down. So like Volek, for example, he's heavily countered through itemization, particularly. Slows, mortal strikes, team composition, those all have a big impact on him. Additionally, I think shapers like that will have an easier time being community balanced or self-balanced when we introduce a ranked/draft experience where players will have an easier opportunity counterpicking him with characters like Kensu who can perma slow him, or characters like Viana who can mortal strike him, naturally. So we're also keeping that in mind. We're waiting. We're making a lot of our balance decisions are made with the future in mind. So those I'm hopeful that a lot of the problems will be heavily mitigated by a draft mode.
Right.
So you were saying like items can be, or certain shapers can be itemized against. So just on the topic of items, are there any like sleeper OP items that you think that we should be seeing more of? Come on,
If
got
you say rampancy,
I swear to God.
I swear to God, Gasty, if you say rampancy.
It will not be rampancy.
Rampancy will be very, very strong when the big update hits, but it is not strong.
Oh, the Gasty tease.
We'll go back to
that. Some sleeper OP items are Grace. Grace is extremely good. I don't see a lot of
Thank you. I'm glad someone else is saying Grace is good.
I like Influence over Grace, but I can see Grace being very strong as well.
Influence is another one. Influence is extremely strong.
Motion items in general probably aren't built enough.
Let's see. Influence and Grace are definitely up there. Impulse is another one.
Really?
Two not so sleeper OPs, just straight up OPs that you'll probably see getting adjusted next patch are a lot of the things out of the balance tree. The balance tree in general, very strong.
Damn.
But wait, I do have a quick question about that. So you say the balance tree is really strong.
I'm sorry.
No, they are. They're incredibly strong. Like I told you, Spinal. I was like, this is mind-boggling.
The day I discovered that, I feel like I broke something.
I was telling you. So anyway, my issue with them is they're so strong, and yet they all have 30. Or balance starts at what, 35 MR, and you go up into Betrayal, still 35 MR. You go up into Oppression, it's still 35 MR. You go up into Valor, you get 5 more MR. Why is it that there are like no stat changes on any items like from second tier to third tier unless it's purely a tank oriented item?
It is a relatively complicated answer, but the simple version is because of the item system in general. It's because our item system does not function based on combinatorics in the way that Dota or League of Legends item stores do. In order to be fun, in order to have a good time in this video game, you need to be able to buy something relatively often, right? When you go back, you want to be able to buy something and feel good about your purchase. With our kind of upgrade talent tree style item system, if you are waiting to buy a legendary, you are not purchasing an item as quickly as we want you to. You're not hitting our targets towards purchase cadence. As a result, unlike Dota and League of Legends, where legendary items in those two respective games are the most efficient items,
right?
We actually have a reverse efficiency. Basic items are the most efficient in terms of them per stat, then advanced, then legendaries at the least efficient. So in terms of raw stat efficiency, we encourage you to go broad instead of deep, so that you're encouraged to buy, so that your purchase cadence aligns with your opportunities more. You're able to buy something every time you go back and feel good about that purchase by filling your items up with basic and advanced items, only necessarily getting a legendary item if you really need the unique passive it provides.
Right. And that makes total sense, except for the fact that you guys are now, it seems like things are kind of going towards this advanced tier 1500, legendary tier 3000, and as nice as it would be to simplify everything down to a level that allows you anybody accessibility. It's very, very obvious on the accessibility. You would have to change some of those items to be stronger and stuff like that, or weaker, etc. But I feel like some of the beautiful aspects, or one of the most beautiful aspects of Dawngate, is the fact that you have so much player choice. And so I can go back now and get this item, and it's a little bit cheaper, but I will come back to the field, or maybe I've just died, and I could leave and get another 300, or I could just buy this right now. Or we have your system, well, where it seems to be going towards, where it's like you just have to save up for this amount of Vim, etc., and then go, so like is there a reason that you would be taking out some of that versatility of choice and build for, like, what is the reason, or can you tell us that?
So I will try to tap dance around this issue to the best of my capabilities.
Oh, it's one of those. I found one.
This is obviously, you can see that a trend towards itemization pricing. This trend is in preparation for the big update that's coming. It is connected relatively at a core level with the large scale update that's coming. So you are missing a lot of the pieces of the puzzle, so go along with it. The reason why we're doing it right now is for balance reasons. By trickling out the required balance changes with these items, we're able to do it in a way that doesn't upset the entire community from a balance perspective. Like, I remember when Itempalooza launched, right? The Hope Gate and the form stacking and all of these areas. The reason why those balance outliers occurred was because we made like 150 balance changes in a single patch.
Right.
And we got 148 of them correct, so to speak.
I know.
It really wasn't that bad.
It still boggles my mind that you guys got that much right.
Right, but it doesn't matter. If there's one outlier, it can create a horrible experience. So we're doing it a little bit safer this time around. We're doing it in small batches. We're seeing how it affects the balance. Then we're doing it a little bit more, so incrementally to create a more stable balance environment. But it's all in preparation for a big update, which is coming. I can say that the goals you described I would hope would still be true. The price points are all within 500 Vim, so you are either able to go back, if you're at 250, you either stick around and save up 250 and then buy something large, or you can go back and buy something immediately, right? The decision you just described of, I have X and I can either save up and for Y and go get something, or go buy something immediately. My hope is that would still always be true, because you should always be within a small margin of one of those two price points. And in the way that hopefully the two axes of tuning should hopefully make it so that both directions are viable. You can either go broad and get more stats because the cheaper items are more stat efficient, or you can go deep and get more powerful passives. But that is something which will be more clear when the whole picture is complete, which hopefully will not be too far away.
Is this like winter is coming and it's going to be 7 years from now that we're actually going to get this update, or is this?
No, this is soon TM.
Is this soon on the horizon?
This is soon TM. It is one of our highest priority things that we are working on right now.
Okay.
Now, is this related to your big tease about the progression system changing?
It is, yes.
Now, is the out of game progression?
No, this is in game progression.
No. Okay.
So during the game.
Yep.
All right. Well, real quick, do you guys plan on?
Do you have an out? Yeah, that's.
Well, out of game progression is like levels 1 through 30 in League. Your character level, your player level. Do you guys have a player career in mind, or because I think it's functioning fairly well without it, but I think that a player career in League helps to kind of filter who can. Yeah, it motivates you. It also filters who can and can't rank.
Yeah, I was going to say it matters more about for when the implementation of ranked comes, but.
Yeah, I think that. So to answer the question, yes, we are planning on having a player career. However, we want to use it as much more towards a reward structure than a content gate. We want to make it so that we simply use it as a as a way to play like, hey, if you've invested a lot of time in Dawngate, you should absolutely be rewarded for that, right? And that's awesome. We should celebrate that fact. So we are planning on having a system, but it will be designed around rewarding the player for playing the game, and not necessarily to lock lots of content around. And in terms of things like ranked accessibility, we could attach it to a career There's other options available. We could just say number of games played, whatever that number is, where we feel players are experienced enough at the game. We could say you must, have reach maybe we have. I shouldn't say this because there's no plans to do this. So it'll be taken out of context, so never mind. But maybe if we have some form of shaper-specific progression, right, where it's like maybe you have to have reached X level with every shaper before you can access ranked, or who knows, whatever, right? There are lots of different avenues we can do with that. Maybe we'll attach it to career progression, maybe we won't. We haven't decided yet.
So I know that your brother is actually working on that.
Right. Career progression is something we want to do, but it's not the highest priority for us right now, and compared to a lot of our other features.
So this in-game progression, how much? Man, how do I want to say this? Do you think that we will have to relearn the game? Do you think that it's going to be drastic? I mean, because you said it's going to have more impact than Item Palooza, and
that's crazy.
That was a massive
because Item Palooza also came with map 2.0, so that's kind of that changed everything.
We had to relearn the game. So how much relearning?
You will not need to relearn the game by the same. It is a very different update. Its goals are extremely different. It has a large amount of impact, but it is. What's the best way to describe it? So Dawngate has gone through a journey, right, with the community. We did not keep the game internally and hidden away until we were 100% sure what the gameplay was, because we had a hypothesis, which no other game company has really tried to do, at least at this scale, where we said we can include our community in effectively our pre-production, where we're still iterating on core gameplay, and reach a final product faster. I think Map v2 is what you saw being sort of the result of that, right? We had an idea for what Dawngate was. By working with the community, we were able to create a more polished version of that gameplay and launch it to our community in the form of Map v2 and Item Palooza. The result of that, however, was very, very early on, right? Before we even launched Dawngate, we didn't have as good of an idea about what the game was, because we were going through this process where we built it with the community. Now that we have a much better idea about what the game is, the progression update is designed around polishing the core experience around what the game is now. There are ways we can make the game just a lot crisper. It support existing gameplay and existing Dawngate differentiating features in a way which is more. It's just more appropriate for what Dawngate is. It will result in differentiating Dawngate further away from the existing competition out there, relatively significantly. However, it shouldn't change your core gameplay you're doing in the game. It should just support it and make it a lot clearer.
That's exciting stuff.
That's a lot.
I don't really know what that means, but I'm excited to do it.
Still, which I really apologize for, but that is the gist of it, so to speak.
Right.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, well, man.
I think the best thing you can think about is I'm talking to like the viewers, to maybe to Joe and Randy, what do you think makes Dawngate as opposed to generic MOBA 13?
Well, it used to be the respawning bindings, but not that anymore. On that point, when are we getting the uniqueness put back into our bindings?
Oh my gosh, it's happening, right?
That is still a priority for us, certainly.
All right.
The large update will have a much greater impact on differentiation, so that is a higher priority for us, because it also creates much more appropriate gameplay. It improves the gameplay experience significantly. But after that, the bindings will be getting some love.
So
I can wait.
Gasty, we're talking about, systems designer Gasty. How do you feel the game? I'm gonna make a wild guess and say that the next update is gonna address. Is the next update going to address snowballing effect and or how do you feel about snowballing in the current live version of the game? Because my perspective as a player is that I know the snowballing we're in a different realm. All we have to go on is Dota 2 or League of Legends as kind of my breadth of experience on competitive play, and in those games are much longer. Dota 2 has the longest ones. I think League of Legends still has I would say about 45-minute average compared to Dawn Gates. I would say somewhere around 35 or 30. So I know that compounds the issue of snowballing because the game by itself is it's in its nature to be a shorter game. But how do you feel that snowballing is in the current iteration of the game?
The short answer is I think it is too snowbally. I think that there is a perception that exists in Dawngate right now. I think it also exists in League of Legends and Dota. And I think it's probably a common denominator with the MOBA genre right now, which is, and true or not, this is I personally feel this is at least a perception based on the communities. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. That in solo queue, at least, games are often decided by the weaker members of the team more so than the higher skilled members of the team. That it's sort of a lowest common denominator has a really high impact.
Interesting.
I don't disagree with that statement.
The large update we're working on is also going to address the snowballing of the game. We are making some relatively experimental changes to make it significantly weighted more towards the higher skilled members of the team.
Interesting. Interesting. Very interesting.
So it should result in snowballing being reduced, but it should allow people to make more of an impact if you are good. It's really hard to tap dance around this issue without specifics.
Okay.
We won't press you too much, but that's
I like it. I like it a lot.
That's interesting. All right. Well, one issue that's near and dear to my heart is the constant struggle that is the Predator role. I mean, it's gone from being absolutely incredibly way too strong to the point where now, you know, people dodge you or flame you, or I mean, me, like I'm a more well-known player in this game, and like I get like annihilated in chat for picking Predator, and I'm like, no, just let me do this. Like this is the role I played more than anything else. I know how to do this properly, but it's, you know, like you guys obviously don't want that. And I know we've heard, you know, the Predator rework is coming. Was that something we would see with this big update, or do you plan on kind of fast tracking something like Predator because it is such a thing? Like it's like literally like tearing teams apart.
I mean, the role system in itself is pretty core to what makes Dawngate unique, and so having 1/4 of it be broken makes it hard to, you know, stand that table up and say this is Dawngate, you know. So
yeah, I think it's an excellent point. Roles are a pretty integral part of the large update. The Predator that we are working with internally cannot exist on live. There are things on the update that exist that just literally do not exist on live that make it function.
So this is being held back for the progression system update.
Okay.
Predator specifically is being held back for the progression update.
Are there any
other changes?
Are there any
other
features
roles?
that? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that makes sense.
There are changes to some of the other roles that I think probably can be fast tracked, and you probably will see get rolled out more incrementally beforehand, kind of like we're doing with some of the itemization pricing changes. Also, since I see it happening in chat, just to head off that particular. No, it is not team level experience like HOTS. It is nothing like HOTS.
That's good. I didn't want to ask that because I was afraid it might have been that, and I was like, I don't want to ask that and make him like put him on the spot. But now that you did that, thank you.
That actually makes it far more snowbally, because individual progression is really important to reduce snowballing, because if one guy has 90% of your team's power, because they're like 20 and 0 and level a billion, you can kill him. Right, like 4v1 doesn't matter how powerful that guy is, he will die.
And then it's over. Then you just.
And then when you remove that massive chunk of power, you are all of a sudden more powerful than your team, than the enemy team. If you automatically distribute everyone's power across an entire team, then it doesn't matter. You just only lose. Right? If every single member of the enemy team is just more powerful than every member of your team, it just results in you being unable to take down high priority targets, and it actually creates a much more snowbally experience. So it is nothing like that. Rest assured.
That makes sense.
Interesting. I like that.
So are there any other features that are being held back specifically because of the progression system that you guys plan on updating?
Um,
I mean, obviously not spectator mode, not bots, not tutorials. Those are kind of all separate. But are there any? And so Predator seems to be the only one so far that you can say.
Predator just literally won't function without the progression update.
I
So
see.
that's definitely synced. There
Mhm.
are there are some other things, but they're too controversial for me to want to say right now.
Got it.
Um,
That's
That's
fair.
fair.
That's fair.
Yeah, it's okay.
That means big things are coming. Get ready to get out your boxing gloves for some
So excited.
fisticuffs.
I mean, something to reiterate all this, right? Like Dongate is still in beta, and just like it was
Right.
with Map V2, we are still trying to create the best game it will be, right? I think this will probably be the last giant update for sure, because
Interesting.
the Map V2 was like, okay, what is the core gameplay, right? And this is now touching all the supporting systems and all of the core systems around supporting that gameplay that we came to with Map V2. So it's sort of the second half of the puzzle, right? It was, but you know, it's it's coming.
You don't have to entrap yourself anymore. You,
Right.
you've given us plenty on that, so that's all good things to hear.
Oh, well, back to the role thing. Is there any consideration of maybe a fifth or even a sixth role? Like, I mean, because I feel like if you add a fifth one, then new people are going to be like, you have to have one of each on your team. You can't have two of the same thing. So, like, is there any idea of like or any plans to maybe make more roles so that it's even more versatile, or is that just too difficult because you feel like we've covered all of the different archetypes on ways to get Vim and experience?
I think that there is room for more roles, but there would need to be very clear gameplay that it's trying to support. I
Mhm.
wouldn't want to add a new role until there is a well understood gameplay style that people want to do or are trying to do, which simply is just
Interesting.
not as effective as it could be without role support.
Right. That makes sense too.
We're gonna have to break the meta a little bit harder, guys.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty. I mean, I've said this before. We're pretty stuck in the league meta mentality,
Right.
and we
Right,
need to
right,
break
right,
it
right.
more. We need to practice it more. Actually, on the whole idea of practicing something more, when this progression system comes out, you said we're not going to have to like relearn the game, but are you guys going to have to start all of your data from zero? Are we essentially going into, because you said like we're in an iterative state at this point, and you've been gathering all of this information up until now, but will this make such a big change that all of a sudden we'll be back into like first day of open beta?
I don't think it'll be that extreme. No. However, it will probably be a balance reset. It's tricky for us internally. I remember Dibs lamenting the other day because there are changes that result of characters like Viridian were much stronger on the internal environment than they are on the live environment right now, because of some of these changes. And he was like, "Oh, if only we could have it launched right away."
Is this kind of like
makes shaper
a
design more easy. You know, it gives them a lot more freedom from shaper design standpoint. So. There are some changes, but it won't be as nearly that drastic, I don't think.
because yeah, I mean, like, I know you guys told us after the fact that shapers like Mara and Salas, I think, were tuned for live with Item Palooza, Map V.2 in
Yep.
In mind, and so when they came out on live, everyone's kind of like, well, and
What
now
do these
look
do?
at
Yeah.
Mara's one of the
Yeah.
most. The most,
Egregious.
yeah, she's, it's like
how's
her
it-
and Mina
what's-
right now.
What's the data say about Mara?
Yeah, what do you guys
Mara?
think about
Because-
Mara?
Because
Right.
those free stats, though.
A lot of people
those
want to talk
free
about
stats.
Mara.
Yeah, I mean, it's just there is not the next shaper, but the shaper after that really prefers the new environment. So there is it does.
Wait,
We
what do you mean
are-
the new
we are-
environment?
the
Play environment.
The new progression? Okay,
The
but that shaper won't be in that environment, so it's going to feel off?
It'll probably be, yeah, I mean, as off as Mara pre Map V2 felt.
Okay, so in
Okay.
two shapers, we will still not have the progression system. That's what I gathered from that. Thank you.
Now, yeah, you won't have the progression system in 6 weeks.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sweet.
That's good for managing expectation. Okay.
You got to read between the lines, guys. You got to read. That's important. So okay, so another thing that I think Dawngate stands on is the role system. Is this setup that Dawngate has separated itself from other MOBAs, but it's essentially it's pitching that we have a very flexible meta, meaning like you can put anybody anywhere. So you have like 80 carries in the jungle. I think who was it? Michaela was big in the jungle for a little while. I haven't really seen 80 carries there in a while because people are scared to break the meta. They get stuck in their ways, and they don't know that it's not efficient unless they practice it for 150 games. And I don't think people are practicing breaking the meta enough. So how do you guys plan on making it so that we actually feel like every shaper can do everything? Maybe not the most efficiently, but still capable of doing it.
I'm trying to decide if I want to talk about a specific thing with Hunter or not. I'll talk about one part of it.
Ooh, I'm asking the
so-
right questions tonight, guys.
One of the things that we are trying out with Hunter is an archetype specific buff on the roll. So bruisers get a different benefit from supports, from tanks, from carries, as a way to try to give certain archetypes benefits that other archetypes won't get. Because there's a problem where, like, if you buff, if you want to make a Nisa a viable jungler, then how do you do it in a way that doesn't just make Voltic a better jungler, right? Any buff you give, if you give them both equal buffs, the ones which naturally have a better jungle kit are just going to be even more efficient. So there are that is an example of an avenue to try to allow for different shapers to succeed in that role more effectively than they do currently.
Now that's interesting because Mina is actually the only shaper we've seen so far that actually will give buffs specifically based on archetypes.
Right, and that may not end up going live, right? That is something that is currently being investigated.
But I just want to say that was one of the most
Exactly.
interesting things about her kit, in my opinion, was the fact that she knew what kind of shaper she was currently riding. So that I'm interested to see if that can be used anywhere else to help balance the game, or if that would actually make the game that much more difficult to balance.
Right. The other thing, do I want to talk about this? I feel like it's only good for me.
It's a night of yes.
Like selfishly, I can crowdsource some of the community's help on this, but it also is controversial. So we'll see. So something that we are experimenting with internally, and this will make some people sad, and it'll probably make some people happy, and it may not go live, is I want to try to find a replacement for Vanquish. I want to try to remove Vanquish.
Thank you.
I love that idea.
This is the thing.
Light Vicious of Dawngate.
Yeah, please, man. Like,
Right. For a variety of reasons, right? But it is one of the biggest reasons is just Hunters going to have, and junglers in general, just going to have one less spell.
Mhm.
And it's
yes!
It just sucks, right?
It's
like,
no choice. Dawngate is
It's
built
like
on
boots.
That is no choice.
Now we've tried a variety of different mechanics to try to do it. Some of them work well, some of them don't. If the community has, I would like to hear what the community thinks about that. Right? Do they even like that direction? Do they not?
There's one thing that's interesting is that about Vanquish is that there is this ability to make dynamic plays with this spell. So you would be removing that unless there was something else that allowed you to still make a dynamic steal, or a steal over the wall, or a para steal, etc., etc.
Right. So I encourage the community to think about ideas for what they would be interested in seeing there. The goals being, it's something that exists, preferably not a spell, preferably something we could put onto the Hunter role that allows them to try to give them a advantage in objective control, right? Especially Parasite. That does not require them to basically sacrifice a spell slot. So
I like where the focus
John
is.
Said, John just said this. This is great. Oh God, yeah. Give me level 7 junglers with an offensive spell to gank me. Yes, please give me that.
So to touch on that, real quick, the jungle, and this is also brought up in Mars's post, so I think it is relevant to discuss. Is I am not happy with the jungle level advantage either, but it's also very difficult to solve right now. I will say it is solved in the progression update. That is that is no longer a problem in the progression update.
That's a big issue too. I think that's one of the big reasons people in low MMR have such a problem with. I don't think it's the people in the low MMR have a problem with Volek. I think it's more of a problem with the combination of Volek and the jungle
And
being the way it is,
and his kit being
his
the way
kit,
it is.
and but the jungle being the way it is also. Like if you're new to Dawngate and you're going up against someone who has an idea of what's going on, and they come out of the jungle level 6 and you're in lane at level 4 and he walks under your binding and 2 shots you, like, yeah, I could see how with the limited information that you have, you're like, this guy is broken. This is terrible. How could this be? Waystone, why don't you see this? And I think it is kind of the things you're talking about, and it is, and it's really nice to hear at least that, you know, these sorts of things are more are less prevalent with this progression update.
Right. I mean, the problem right now on live is that we're very stuck, because if we want them to hit level 2 off of a single buff camp, which feels bad if you don't, then the buff camp needs to be worth a certain amount of experience, and going below that experience amount is very hard. So we can reduce total experience they gain by reducing the small camps and keeping buff camps at level 2. But if you do that, then small camps become no longer worthwhile, and we fall back into the jungle 1.0 environment where people only bounce between buff camps. So it puts us in a very difficult location right now if we want to make sure they're going to hit level 2 off of the first camp. That's what kind of is forcing the jungle experience tuning into where it is right now. But again, that is sort of, it's temporary, I can say, because it is resolved with the progression update.
So there's basically, like, part of Mars's post was saying that I actually disagree, but only because in my that he says that junglers will come out 6 and generally stay ahead through efficient jungling and ganking. But I find that it gets you ahead really early, and then you're struggling to use the jungle to stay relevant and to keep your levels up so that your vanquish is at the same level or higher than the enemy jungler, and so you end up not being a part of the fights often because you're like, oh well, I'm not leveled enough to actually be good enough in that fight, so I have to jungle, or I'm helping in this fight and I'm wasting time because I'm not getting kills or assists, and so I'm not leveling, so now I have to go back to the jungle, and it's just like this big juggle that junglers have to do. And so you're saying the progression system will certainly help with that kind of a thing.
Yep. Yeah, it'll help with both circumstances that you described.
Oh, both. Okay. Awesome.
Right. I hate to cut this short, but we are kind of going long here, so I do want to give the chat and opportunities to ask Gasty some questions. So if you guys have any specific questions for Gasty or any of us, please, now's your chance. We'll do this for a few more minutes, and then we'll let Gasty get some sleep, and because he has to go and make the Dawngate better tomorrow. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free. Now is your chance. Speak your mind.
All right, I got one while they're asking, or while they're writing them up. Do you have any plans to fill out the item trees more? Because there are some things that feel lacking, like there are no life drain items that have MR on it, for example.
We are planning on adding more items over time. Life Drain is a tricky tree because it's very niche in its use cases. It's difficult to take advantage of on supports and tanks, for example. Even burst mages have a somewhat difficult time using Life Drain effectively, so that tree is probably...
I mean, Passion has been... Any ability shaper, Passion has been amazing on, for me at least.
Yeah, I mean, it does an okay job, but it could do a lot better. I think it's certainly one of the more tricky trees. But yeah, short answer is yes, we would love to fill those trees out, especially the Life Drain tree. I think the Life Drain tree is a little...
stale?
A little, just not a lot of options there, right?
Sparse, Like, what else do you do with it? Yeah.
You have, like, one option per archetype, and it's like, well, this is my option, I guess. Maybe two, depending on some archetypes. So filling that out more would be nice for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to chat questions. Twerp, you wanna find one?
Yeah. I saw because it's kind of recent. Elman Beastio asked, "What is the reasoning behind Volek's E delay? Can we see it removed? It feels clunky and it's pretty lame." You know, that's something that happened recently. Do you want to talk about that change to Volok?
That was not inside my field, so I can't talk about that too much. It was done not for balance reasons. It was done for art and animation reasons. So I signed off on it because the balance impact it would have was
In the right direction.
appropriate for the state of his balance, but it was not done specifically for a balance reason.
Right. I think that's what Dib said earlier on various chat forums and various streams.
Muzzy, I mean, guys, feel free to pick up.
I'm
I'll
reading
just
chat.
keep picking them. So
I'm sure chat's like way down there now. I'm trying to read all. Gasty, if you see any that you want to answer, obviously
I mean,
jump. What? Looking at chat, I was expecting you guys to do all the hard work.
yeah. Well, if anything catches your eye, if not, I'll keep throwing them at you.
Right.
How about? Are
of
there any plans to buff lane minions experience to compensate for a hunter level issuing now, or are you just gonna wait for the new update?
This is what I'm saying. A lot of these questions are obviously answered by listening to what Gasty said earlier. Just wait. Just wait.
Yeah, Hunter experience does not have a obvious good solution right now. It might get a small tweak. However, it will not get any big overhauls because it is being overhauled by the progression system, soon TM.
Right.
Will there ever be an MR buff in the jungle? That's an interesting one, too.
Anything's possible.
Oh.
I mean, here's the real question. I'm afraid to ask it because I'm really worried, but I'm gonna ask it anyways. So is what you're saying, Gassy, is that we're gonna have to wait for this progression buff for the game to be playable again?
No, only the very few things are tied to it. The only things that are extremely tied to it is jungle
Meridian?
experience and predator.
Okay.
Everything else should be able to occur beforehand.
Okay.
Ecard Vancard asked how do Smurfs affects your data intake for different levels of play, or are you able to find out that info? I would say that he said earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they're not counting anything but the top 3%. So if you're a Smurf, and unless that Smurf gets back to being the top 3%, which it basically is no longer a Smurf, I mean...
And also, when Gassy was talking about the filters before, he said games that were stomps one way or the other usually don't get put into the data. So, and generally, if you're smurfing, you're stomping. And if you're not stomping, why are you smurfing? So,
if you're smurfing, but it's an even game and the top 3% of the player base, then it's like, that's fine.
Yeah,
it's legitimate data.
Then that's just like a normal game.
Spoiler alert, you're not smurfing then. You're just kind of playing the game on a different account.
Right.
All right, so this one's been asked a few times. Why you haven't nerfed the things that are known permas for what?
Basically, Mina and Mara for the current competitive scene. They're constantly band shapers. Do you feel are there any short-term plans to make Mina and Mara seem more balanced for the super competitive level of Dawngate right now?
So both of those characters have out in the two different forms of balance I talked about. One of them hits it on both, and one of them hits it on only one. Mina has been trending up in her performance over time. She came in sort of, relatively close to balanced, and then as people got better and better with her and learned how to exploit the subtleties of her kit, which are really strong, such as the untargetable nature of her dash, stuff like that, her win rate has, as expected, been going up. She is strong right now, so she will be getting nerfed in the next patch to bring her back in line. So
there you
Mina
go, people.
She also hits the other spectrum of it, which she also has elements that are quote unquote balanced, but they are frustrating to play against. So we may look at at trying to address those independent of her statistical performance. That being said, a philosophy that we have, right, that we are still trying to hone in, is we want to keep what's cool about the characters cool, right? These characters have extremely powerful signature abilities, things like Moya's ultimate, for example, right? It's an extremely powerful, very cool ability. When like Moya was a massive problem, we did very minor changes to her ultimate. most of all of our changes were armed at her W and her E, because those elements of her kit are the non-visceral, non-signature components of her kit. Her Q and her R are what are awesome, right? So we didn't want to touch those. We want to keep what's awesome about characters awesome. Keep those elements in a vacuum,
Right.
overpowered. Make the kit powerful. Make the kit balanced by making the non-as essential elements a little bit weaker. Things like Mina's W, for example, is an element of that, right? We would want that to remain very signature. We wouldn't want to make that ability feel weak, because that's what feels very cool about the character. We would want to try to address that character in some other ways. That being said, from the frustration element, right, addressing some of the things that are just very frustrating to play about her, we would potentially be trying to make some adjustments there to reduce that level of frustration. But some people are like, well, just take CC off her kit entirely, right? And it's like, well, we're unlikely to make a change that drastic, but she will be getting touched. Mara is much more tricky, because Mara, over an extremely long sample size, over a very, very long amount of time, is statistically speaking right about where we want her. But she, very similar to Ferris and Ashabel, is in that spectrum where there are elements of her which are very frustrating or perceived as being way too strong. She has invisible elements of her kit which are weak, and so people don't really notice them as much, right? There's opportunity costs there which make her less effective. But if you don't notice the parts where she's not effective, and you only notice the parts of the game where she is effective, then it's very easy to make her feel like she's way out of control. So that's an area where she is imbalanced, certainly, but she's imbalanced from that kit balance, right? Like there are individual parts of her kit which are, from a fun and anti-fun perspective, are not reaching the appropriate ratios. So we need to shift some power around on Mara and do some adjustments to her to keep her performance viable, but reduce the elements of her that are really frustrating to play against from a competitive level.
Okay.
And you'll see some of those adjustments pretty soon as well, probably.
Apparently, people want you to fix Cerulean's flip.
No. I want to flip blinking variants.
We would like to flip Cerulean. We would like to fix Cerulean's flip. It is a much more complicated problem. It's not that we have chosen not to. It's that we are investigating the correct technical solution to try to solve that, not only for Cerulean's flip, but for other things like it. Another example is Salus's E has the same problem as Cerulean's flip, where you will blink and then be rooted by Salus's E, even though it's a melee range ability far away. That's a very nuanced problem. We are looking to solve it.
Do you have any plans for Fellerin had a question about like a vision sweeper kind of mechanic, but I mean, are you guys okay with the current vision system? Are there any plans for the changes with this new progression system? Is that going to affect vision, or are you guys happy with the way vision is right now?
The progression system will not affect vision. We're not unhappy with how vision is right now. I don't think it's working badly. However, I think that there's opportunities there for more interesting gameplay. So we probably will experiment with additional vision choices. However, it would not be until after the progression update.
Like potentially different types of wards, like larger radius, shorter duration, stuff like that, or?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what form that would take. My expectation is that it would probably use the same technology our spellbook system does. So you would choose a single vision option of some flavor. But again, the system is working well right now, so it's not a massive priority.
It's simple and feels incredibly balanced at this point. So that's an interesting one too. Do you have concerns about community resources like Dawn Scout?
That's a good question.
Which one? Go ahead.
Our auto attack resets bugged. They seem to bug on Volek and Viridian, and it's really punishing to not have the second Viridian dash. I've noticed it on Volek. There is a case where you can use his auto attack reset, which I believe is his Q, and you will neither get the auto attack reset nor will your auto attack proc the Q. So you just kind of have a green sword while you're waiting for the auto attack to reset, and then you hit him with the Q. But I guess that's more of a bug report thing.
Yeah, that sounds like a bug. If somebody knows of a way to reproduce that reliably, please let us know. Certainly, we'll take a look at that. Sounds like a bug.
Okay.
Just to appease the masses, do you have anything you want to say about crafting currency?
We're overhauling that. It'll be it is being tracked. You will get it will be paid
It
out.
will
to
matter.
You. It will matter, absolutely. You will be
That's
able
very
to
nice.
use that crafting currency in the future. That is a high priority for us, certainly. So it is happening.
Okay. Yeah. So everyone, ease your minds, all hearts and minds. Let's keep them clear. Let's keep them. Crafting currency is being tracked. You're not losing it. Muzzy, do the question you had before.
Okay, yeah. Do you have any concerns about community resources like dawnscout.com negatively impacting user experience and leading them to more complaints and dodges?
Especially when it comes to matchmaking.
Yes, though I don't think it's Dawn Scout's fault. I think that it is.
Screw Dawn Scout.
fault-
Bunch of scumbags run that site.
I think that
Really, I only know one.
I think that it is our fault at Waystone because we can influence what the community's perception is on Dawn Scout by what information we give to Dawn Scout. For example,
Right.
we only give Dawn Scout the solo queue rating. So that creates a perception that solo queue rating is your matchmaking rating, which is not accurate.
It's not. Yeah.
That's not their fault. That's the only resource they have available to them. But it does create a misconception within the community around if a balanced match has occurred. I know that John sent me a screenshot from Willard the Pig the other day when he was like, WTF, what is this match I had? And he ended up dodging the match, which is unfortunate because that means we don't get full match telemetry on it.
Yep.
Um,
I've said that to
I
everyone who
looked into it,
dodges.
and it was a case of him, 3 people who had low solo queue ratings, but MMR was within 30 points of his. So, and then 1 person who was relatively new but was dual queuing with one of those really good people, so he got pulled into it. So it was a completely reasonable match from the actual MMR standpoint, but Dawn Scout made it look completely ridiculous because 4 of the 5 people had unranked solo queue ratings because they just had like 100 games played with friends and like 4 games played solo.
Right, but how many games does it actually take, do you think, before your incredibly fluctuating your MMR kind of just like solidifies into, yes, you should be in this range, It's about 100 games, or
is your question how long does it take for your MMR to reach your true skill, or how long it takes your solo queue rating to reach your MMR?
No, the first one. I don't care about solo queue rating at all.
Takes about 90 games.
About 90.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Interesting.
So right around 90 games, your MMR is fairly accurate to your skill level.
It is extremely accurate within 90
Got it.
games. It is
Okay.
Wow.
It is relatively accurate after about 50.
Got it. Thank you. That's awesome information.
interesting.
That isn't. Yeah. No. I mean, that's
That
one of
is
the questions
awesome.
people always wonder about.
But you also have to remember that people grow and get better
Yeah.
sometimes.
Right.
as it
Absolutely.
works.
It's actually a
Start
very
growing.
interesting. There's very interesting math behind why that is true, which I won't bore you guys with. But
I wouldn't
the
be
absolute
bored.
best method is a free for all game. Like if you play like Halo, like 8-player free for all.
Oh, yeah.
A game mode like that can determine your true skill within about 5 to 10 games.
That's
Really?
so interesting.
So,
Wow.
did you just say we're going to have an arena-style Dawn Gate match?
That's what I'm hearing.
I wouldn't look too much into that, but
I think that's what I heard, guys. I think it's been just confirmed. Thanks, Gasty. I appreciate that, sir.
no problem.
Just to be clear, I was joking. That is not confirmed. Has Waystone considered doing some sort of like an in-game mentor program to help create a more helpful and friendly community? Kind of like after, let's say, 100 games, you might get a message and be asked to tutor somebody who has sub 10 games, where we get to use like the spectator mode to watch and guide that one person for a game. And maybe if you do like 10 of them, you get some sort of a badge or something, like some sort of an in-depth, helpful system like that.
I would love to do that. We've had discussions internally about exactly what form that would take. I think that there is opportunities that exist to do a really, really good, create a really good experience there. I think that Dota 2's guides that use the in-game HUD to it's an in-game guide you can activate where it like has descriptions around why you level stuff up and what items to get and why is very cool. but I think that there's another problem too. There's two problems. There's the mentor
have time
problem,
to
like you
read it.
described. There's I want to teach somebody how to play, and where I would love to make fully integrated systems to support that. And there's also the problem of I want to just play with somebody at a much lower skill level than me, right? I want to dual queue with somebody 800 level below me. How do we accomplish that goal in a way that does not inherently cause matchmaking to freak out and create an imbalanced experience? So there is both of those problems are on our radar, and we would love to address both of them systemically.
I feel like the only way to really do that is to allow whoever it was that got the mentoring was able to rate their person, because I mean, I feel like people would just, yeah, okay, if I get something out of doing these mentoring matches, then I'm just going to do them and be a total asshole or horrible at it, and then they get whatever it was coming to them for no reason. There's so many hard things to balance in a system like that, but I'm definitely interested in that in the future.
Yep.
Mars had a question that was, how can we better assist you with balance for the competitive level play since data doesn't appropriately cover that environment?
So I assume that he means the difference between a organized setting and not, because from my perspective, and I would love to hear the community's thoughts on this, right? The main difference between our telemetry data benchmarks, which are around not competitive, not tournament play, but they are around extremely high skill level play, is the difference between that is the team versus solo queue experience, right? There are going to be strategies which exist in a tournament environment, in a 5-man pre-made organized environment, which are more difficult or less likely to be used in solo queue simply because of a communication standpoint, and as a result will not be represented by the telemetry data. That's the only clear example of a difference between the two that I can think about off the top of my head. If there are others, I would love to hear it so that we can try to address those gaps as well. The difference between those two experiences are certain compositions will be far more effective than others. In my experience, things like, so running a tri-lane and a solo lane, or running multiple junglers, or running certain characters and roles that require teammates to help them. What we don't see, based on our experiences working there, I'm trying to think about how to do this in a nice politically correct way.
I mean,
based on my experiences working at Riot with professional League of Legends players, the differences between those competitive environments and the very, very, very high MMR environments are not massively significant, not enough to make a difference in the data generally. There are some outliers, but they're very, very far and few between.
That's interesting.
So, but again, I would love to hear people. Right, in the chat, I see people disagreeing with me, which is fine. I'd love to have these discussions. Right, what is going to be the best thing, right? The best advocate for you guys is to be able to clearly articulate what creates the differences between our heavily filtered data and the tournament environments.
Garwar's been asking, when will we see ranged carries from somewhere other than the East and West? I doubt this is a question for you, though.
I unfortunately cannot answer that for you.
Of course.
You gotta bait him better than that, Gar. Come on.
I think I would venture to guess. I don't know. I think the perception. I'll say this. The perception is that, and the perception coming from the fact that in my opinion, there's not very many competitive teams. That the perception is that the way solo queue matches people up, perhaps, or maybe also a combination of the small community, is that like even the top 3% of the games, like if I'm considered part of the top 3% of the players, I'm not sure that 100% of my games I'm in, maybe about 50% if I'm lucky, of the games that I'm in really qualify as high-level Dawn Gate because of the nature of various variables, which lead to the perception that I have that maybe one or two players on one side or both sides is not necessarily playing at the same level as everybody else. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense, and I think that is absolutely true, right? Which is why our filters is not limited to just the top 3%, because I think Myanhe said something in chat here. High MMR means nothing when you have people getting carried out of the depths of hell. Obviously, that's a bit of a hyperbole, but it's a good example towards what
We
you're
love
describing,
that.
right? And we account for that, right? We
Mhm.
have a lot of different filters to isolate those games and remove them from our sample size. Like you said, it's actually smaller than 50%, right? It's much smaller than 50%. By the time it goes through all of our filters, which again,
Okay.
just to name
Mhm.
a handful of the most common ones, right? We apply a lot based on different scenarios, but it's like top 3%. The elo differential between the highest person and the lowest person on the team needs to be within a relatively small threshold to remove like giant dual queues
Right.
and
Right.
stuff
Right.
like
Right.
that. The Vim differential between the teams needs to be within 20% to remove stomps. We also throw out a variety of weird outliers in terms of times. If a game ends in like 12 minutes, something like that would obviously get thrown out.
Right.
Things have any form of disconnects, even if it has a reconnect, things like that will get flagged and thrown out. Things where players are doing things that are extremely unorthodox, things like playing Jungle Nisa or whatever, those will get flagged, right, as things that potentially need to get filtered out.
Oh
We
man, I get
apply
flagged all the time then.
Right. We apply a massive amount. To your point, right? You feel like out of your solo queue games, you feel like there's a significant amount which don't apply to high level play and are definitely not indicative of competitive environments. We agree. We can isolate those with data
Mhm.
relatively easily, and we remove them from our analysis. Where we do a very very careful process to really address and look at games which are only really indicative of high level play.
Yeah. I think that answer goes a long way to addressing a lot of the issues that I have. So hopefully that answers some of the questions people in chat have too.
Yeah. Um, Real quick about new systems and stuff like that. Are there going to be any more ping menus, like a ward ping wheel specifically, or a
Ooh, that'd be
conversation
a
ping
nice
wheel?
one.
I'd
The
love to
ward
have a
ping would.
ward specific one because
I think that'd be really
there are so
nice.
many times where I'm like, you click and you go ward, and someone goes and wards there, and I'm like, no, I was trying to tell
No,
you
no,
there is a
no.
ward there, and there's not enough time to type because you're trying to do things. Like I feel like information, fast communication devices like the ping wheel can be incredibly helpful for those who use it.
Yeah, I would love to have more quick communication in there. I think that it's only been proved relatively successful. I think that we would there's we want to add a variety of them basically. I think it would be neat to have like an emote wheel. I think it would be neat to have a assist me ping in the current ping wheel. I think that having a ping wheel around vision could be interesting, especially if we expand the vision system. It's definitely something that we would like to do.
Cool. All right,
Is
let's
there
wrap it
Question
up with the
two, which I
last
want to address
few
real quick.
questions, and then let's call
What's
this.
Waystone's stance on 5-stack versus 5 solo
That's what I was
players?
gonna say. Yeah.
That can't happen.
Right.
it
5-man
doesn't
pre-made will not get matched against 5
it
solo.
does not work.
Literally
Yeah, exactly.
impossible.
Yeah.
Oh.
Is there any intent to put the paratimer or buff timers built into the map in some way, kind of like how you have cores and wells? The timers are visual rather than actual numbers or something like that. That way, no one has to type it in because that's not really a skill that you need. Remembering is a skill, I
Interesting.
guess, but
Yeah, we would. Being good at Dongate should not be about bookkeeping. So we are planning on creating a diegetic parasite visual timer.
Diegetic, new word.
Ooh,
Sorry, an in world parasite timer.
I
Yes.
like it.
that's good.
What do you feel is the ideal number of each archetype before introducing a draft system?
Hashtag
You
30 and a
wouldn't want to
hook.
ban it out.
What's that?
So, assuming the number of bands, right? Assuming that you have 2 bands or 3 bands, depends on how many bands you have. But basically, number of bands plus 2, so that you can have at least 1 per team per
Right.
archetype, is probably the
But I mean
minimum.
wouldn't you say +3? Because if you do +2 and one team gets to pick first, then basically you're forcing the other team to play that a very specific shaper.
That's certainly not optimal, right? I think that plus
Right.
3 is a better experience, but I think that plus
Sure.
2 would be the absolute bare minimum.
Bare
right?
minimum. I see. I see.
In
Yep.
the sense where you can like ban somebody out of an archetype entirely.
Mhm.
Right.
Let me see if I have any more here. I don't really. Oh, let's see. What do you think of assassins in general? Physical damage assassins feel lackluster to the magic damage assassins? I wouldn't say that. You
I
need to play
wouldn't
more
say that
Viridian.
either.
You need to play more Viridian and Freya, my friend. um, let's see. With the incredibly effective strategy of 80 carries using items that provide hybrid damage, magic and physical, do you feel that there should be easier access to MR, or do you find that the MR that we have is sufficient?
That's a good question. I don't think there should be easier access to MR, because if you make easier access to MR, it impacts burst mages really, really severely.
As well.
Burst mages, unlike armor is basically viable at any amount, because
Mm-hmm.
physical damage is generally sustained for the most part. There's some exceptions, obviously, like Viridian, but generally sustained, which means that if they're getting mitigating you, you just attack them more. Burst mages, a lot of the time, especially with high cooldown burst mages like Zalgus, are all or nothing. They either do enough damage to be meaningful or they don't. So if you eclipse that threshold with MR, all of a sudden their viability goes from 100% to like 0%.
Mhm.
So I think that carries are able to do too much magical damage right now. But I don't think the solution is in adding more MR, because that inadvertently and unintendedly affects mages. I think
Interesting.
it's
Breaks the
I think it's
balance.
more of looking at just how many
Vengeance
sources
nerfs
magic damage they can
incoming.
get and tuning up those
Please.
individual sources.
Even if it's just the size of it, my God.
I
With
love
Fate.
it. That's a
It's
visceral
beautiful.
item if we're
The
talking
Michael
about
Bay build. Seriously, Michael Bay build is beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's like
By the
The
way,
Michael Bay build is real, yeah, and
it
there
is.
are some balance concerns around all that magic damage on 80 carries for sure.
interesting.
But we'd address it in that isolated circumstance as opposed to globally with MR, because that has larger reaching effects.
By the way, how do you feel about Zeal? Because I think it's one of my secret favorite items, even though I don't get to use it because I don't do auto attack based shapers often.
I like it a lot. It's very, very niche.
Yeah.
A lot of the reason because of the stats it provides. So I think that it needs some love. But it's tricky because it can very easily become just the best item if with a slight adjustment. So
Well, it's like Harmony is a pass. It does it passively, and it still was an amazing item for a long time. And this one, you are proactively making it better by attacking faster and getting haste. And so, yeah, any changes to it could easily put it over that tipping point.
yep.
A lot of people are talking about Duress is the most evil item in Dawngate and needs to be looked at. How do you feel about that one?
I don't think it's overpowered it has to do with our balance argument. I don't think it is statistically overpowered, but it's extremely noticeable. It's very, very visceral. So it can be very frustrating to play against in comparison to something that just gives you raw stats, right? Something invisible like Harmony, which is very good in comparison, is a lot harder to feel. Duress is very good. It's definitely a strong item. I don't know if it's too strong, but it's certainly very noticeable, which makes people are definitely going to feel it for better or for worse.
Well, I think also the prevalence of CC in this game is absolutely off the charts. There are two shapers that don't have any form of CC, and I'm including slows in CC because slows are basically death in this game as well. So the fact that you can give anybody an extra ability like that it's like you said, incredibly visceral. It hurts so much.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the prevalence of CC is something that we're cognitive of. Like, I think that we would like to release more shapers with little to no CC going forward.
Interesting.
To try to balance it out a little bit more.
That would be amazing. That would honestly be amazing. All right, guys.
I think we've covered as much as we can for one sitting. But
Gasty, and he gave us quite
quite a bit of good stuff here. That's for sure.
Quite a treasure trove, really a treasure trove of knowledge.
Lots of content in tonight's show. So we gotta thank you again, Gassy, for hanging out with us and answering all of our bozo questions and the bozo questions of Chad.
Happy to have done it.
Yeah, man.
I love talking about this stuff. So.
This is
Hopefully we can do this again, because this was mind-boggling in a good way.
Yeah.
And it really did help open and like bridge that gap, so like people can understand why, where these things are coming from. When changes to the game happen, they're not random and spiteful. They're it is part of this whole. I mean, I found the fact that you guys filter and the way you filter just to be like really fascinating. I had no idea that's how a lot of the balancing was done. Was you take things out of the you filter things and you throw certain games out, and I think it's really. I thought it was really interesting stuff tonight. So thanks again, Gasty.
No problem.
I was here, and I think I'm going to go watch the VOD of this, because there was a lot to read.
This would be a very valuable VOD.
Yeah.
It will be. If people missed it, I highly encourage people to watch the
I'm
VOD.
going to tweet this out. Yeah, this is going out more than just tonight. That's for sure.
Cool.
So, thank you guys very much. Is anyone planning on streaming?
I'm not. I do not stream
am
on Monday
not.
nights anymore. The girlfriend.
God bless Joe.
God
She
bless. Oh, and Waystone Dibs just fixed the Volley Q basic attack reset bug. So thank you, Waystone Dibs.
Now that's service.
Yeah.
That was great.
So.
All right, guys. Do we have any other last announcements?
No other
Yeah,
announcements or anything like that. There is no battle in the bot lane this week because 4th of
Next week.
July. So it will be next Friday. We will get signups for that at some point. I don't
Okay.
know exactly when, but probably this time next week. Normally we announce it on Monday, blah, 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 blah. But thank you guys very much. Feel free to follow the channel if you enjoyed tonight's show. Sometimes I stream on this channel as well. Be sure to follow Blue Muzzy and Spinal Dash. Make sure you check out MOBA-champion, for all of your Dawngate related needs. You can check out Chapers Guild too for all of their stuff. Support everybody. Support all the
Dawn
streamers.
Great.
Support everyone. Dawn Great for
Great
team
for-
stuff.
for
A lot of people want